share what is there, you know, so that's great. Who else would like, oh, Felix is sharing. Who else would like to share? Please open your mic and share what you discussed in your group, if there's any volunteer. Berna, you're unmuting yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I can also, we were actually too fast to join the group, so we missed the instructions, but we managed to be introduced. So we had colleagues from Czech Republic and Serbia, and we also had a chance to even start discussing how they actually do their planning and communications linked to development planning. So even we had some discussions.
Wow.
But very brief.
That's great. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Berna. And for the others, if you would like to share, please continue sharing in the chat box. And I think, as we know, we always end up running late and having little time to discuss. So let's get right to it, to our program for the day. We are very happy to have our two colleagues from the communications team in Istanbul Regional Hub. We have Karen and Mehmet with us. And Karen is a digital communications specialist at UNDP's Istanbul Regional Hub since 2016. And prior to that, she served as editor of the UNDP's global website, and she worked for UNICEF before. And Mehmet, also our dear colleague, thank you for being here. Mehmet manages UNDP's online presence, including all social media channels with a focus on human interest stories. And before that, he worked in UNDP Cyprus. And I happen to know that Mehmet and Karen are very, very busy at the moment. And we would really thank you for both of you for being here today and sharing your experiences with us. So I think without further ado, the floor is yours, Karen and Mehmet.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, Saran. I will share my screen just a second. I think, let's see. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Great. So good morning, everyone. Nice to be talking to all of you. Really exciting to be here. My name is Mehmet, and Karen, I will let you introduce yourself as well.
I am Karen, thank you. I know we're all busy, so thank you also for taking your time to join this series, which sounds like it's been really rewarding and very inspiring in all the last sessions. So I hope we can live up to that as well.
Absolutely. So we're really, happy to talk to you today about kind of our approach and our experience to communications at UNDP in Istanbul. Both Karen and I have been with the office 4 and 5 years respectively. So we support about 20 country offices in the region. So day in and day out, naturally, we're seeing a lot of kind of best practices and then things to avoid. Obviously, all of you are going to have different limitations and constraints depending on what organization you're in and what the external environment looks like. So our intention today is not to tell you, how to do everything, but hopefully by sharing our experience and by using UNDP as a case study in this presentation, we hope that you will come away with certain lessons and certain things that you might find applicable to your situations. And we will, try to keep this short, 20-25 minutes maximum, and then we hope to have a conversation with you with questions and answers. So, I think this is pretty common sense, but I do want to start with kind of the why of communication, just so we're on the same page as we start. So for us, at UNDP, why are we communicating at all? Obviously, the first one is to position ourselves as an organization, as a development leader in this sector. And I'm sure it will be the same for you. This is going to be your first objective as you're communicating, is to position yourself as a development leader and to show the great work that you're doing around the world. The second one, obviously, is awareness, increasing understanding of the global goals, the SDGs, but also of the many issues that we try to tackle as an organization. And connected to awareness, obviously, advocacy is a huge part of the objectives, because once we have people who are aware of the issue, then they can act on it. But obviously, getting people to act on an issue isn't always easy. So we have to think carefully about, okay, how can we do advocacy and inspire audiences into action. And we'll talk about some of the ways that we've tried to do that. And number 4, of course, is acknowledging our donors and funders and mobilizing further core resources for UNDP's operations to continue. All right, that being said, I'm just going to contradict myself now, just after I told you why we communicate. And I'm going to tell you, if there's one thing to take away from this presentation, to be honest, it's to not communicate, but to tell stories instead. And we want to start the presentation with a kind of differentiating communications from storytelling, because I think this is a very, very key differentiation. So when we say communications, what we mean is, you know, a lot of times we will see that people who are working in projects, they just want to get facts about their projects across. So, you know, we organized 5 trainings and 100 people attended the training and 50 of them were women, and, you know, 25 of them were people with disabilities, and it was funded by this donor to this much money, and that's it. But just regurgitating those facts about your project doesn't necessarily help you with the objectives that we mentioned in the previous slide. And that is why we try to approach everything that we do with a storytelling approach. And the difference between a storytelling approach and a communications approach, the main one is that storytelling is more human-centered. So it's about trying to locate who's the beneficiary, who's the hero of this story, who's the person whose life is changing as a result of the work you're doing, and then telling that person's story first. And once you tell that story, then you can combine it with facts. So again, communications tends to be a lot more one-sided. It's more of a monologue, where for us, storytelling is a dialogue. It's two-sided because you care about what the audience might think. You care about if the audience is going to stay until the end of that video. You care about if the audience is going to click on anything else. So you're thinking about their experience as they're consuming the knowledge product that you prepared. And that's what makes storytelling two-sided as opposed to simple communications. So like I said, communications is about reciting facts and figures, whereas storytelling is really about first pulling people in with emotional impact and then giving them the facts afterwards. And communications, that's why it needs to be more it tends to be more old school and it's more traditional, whereas storytelling, I think, is a lot more visual, colorful, and innovative, and there's just so much more we can do with it. So I just want to start the presentation just with that foundation, because everything we say after this is kind of going to build on this. And I hope that's clear.
Can I also say one thing?
Yeah.
I just wanted to add that I think because a lot of you are communicating on behalf of, you know, governments or donors, and one of the reasons that you communicate, I think, is also to convince your audiences that the money that you are spending is worth their tax dollars or their investments or things like that. So I think all of these things also is you have to convince your audience that what you're doing is important and worth it. And when we're talking to individuals and humans and our citizens, they're not going to be convinced by just, you know, generic information. You need to connect with them in a way. So everything Mehmet's saying about storytelling, it's our way where we connect to convince people that what we're doing is worth it.
And that's a perfect segue into the next slide, actually, which is, you know, answering the question, why tell stories at all? And what Karen just said, it's really about number 2, brand identity. You know, when we tell stories that move and motivate people emotionally, you're actually helping them bond with your organization. But the number 1 reason also I want to say is it's science. You know, if you think from yourself about kind of the things that you memorize, the things that you remember, you will see that everything that you tend to memorize or remember is related to emotion and to feeling. And that's why we are always aiming to make people feel something first. Because once you do that, large amounts of information become digestible and easy to remember. So if you do want people to remember things about your project, the best way to do that is going to be through stories. And again, brand identity, it's also going to improve the more stories you tell. And the private sector does this really well. Starbucks has a whole series of stories on YouTube that's about people doing good things, and they never once mentioned Starbucks. But they're aiming to create a product that people connect to, and they know that once people connect to those stories and those videos, they're going to remember Starbucks in association. So it's just something also for us to, I think, take as an example in the development sector. It's not something that we do a lot. And third reason, again, is advocacy. I mean, the more you make people feel something, the more you give them a chance to act on an issue. But also, especially if you're working with vulnerable populations, if you're working with populations who don't really have a voice in the mainstream, through storytelling, you can actually give them a voice. So it's also a moral imperative, let's say. It's also an ethical imperative for us to tell stories about vulnerable communities, underrepresented communities, and give them a voice. Now with that, I just want to say, I mean, a story is a story. Obviously, it hasn't changed, but the way that we tell stories, the way that we produce stories have changed because the digital landscape has changed a lot in the last 10, 20 years. You know, with social media, with video, with all of these things. So it's become a lot more interactive, a lot more fast-paced. The visuals are just incredibly high quality, high resolution. And we're not only competing with other UN agencies, other development agencies, other NGOs, but we're also competing in the same kind of digital sphere with these big conglomerate, you know, media conglomerates like New York Times, Guardian, Washington Post, who are doing incredible, incredible things. So it's become incredibly visual, mobile, real-time, and interactive. And storytelling is everywhere. It's even in a tweet. I mean, when you see a tweet like this from ICRC, how much medicine Yemen needs, how much medicine Yemen has. That by itself is a story, and it moves you. It quickly captures your attention and makes you want to learn more about the situation there, much more so than if this was a press release or if this was a report or if this was a picture of a child, let's say. So Twitter is a great way to do that. Interactive platforms. This is a National Geographic platform. You know, Social Experiment. This is a video from UNICEF. Graphic novels. Again, interactive platforms, GIFs. So there's just so many different ways now online. This is just to show you that we are competing with a lot of really great work out there, and we have to pick it up if we want to kind of exist in the same ecosystem as these organizations. So that being said, I'm going to hand over to Karen to walk you through some formats that we've tried at UNDP that have been successful that we also recommend.
And just one note, in my breakout room, they were talking about how social media is really at the forefront of where we're communicating these days, which is very true. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last year or two, while we do have static things that exist on websites, we've really been putting a lot of attention into the materials that we create for social media, because we know that's really where we're going to have our deepest reach. So videos are always still, even in this digital landscape with things being very creative, one of the best ways to get people's attentions. On social media, we have to caption everything because most times people aren't actually listening with the sound, they're just watching. So even when you have a wonderful video, we still kind of put captions on everything so that people can read it as they're scrolling through, and hopefully we'll catch their attention. Maybe they'll turn the sound on and listen. So we have several different types of videos that we make. One is kind of a more traditional human interest story, but whenever we are telling about a project or a situation that's happening or an issue, we try to put a human at the center of it in these kinds of videos. So the one on the left is a project connecting Armenia and Georgia with a new border crossing. But instead of just telling the story of the border crossing as a building, as an infrastructure, we found a hotel owner in Georgia, in Armenia, who was inviting people that come and stay at his guest house to hop in the car with him, and he would take them over the border into Georgia and give them some sites and take them to eat places. And it was a really great way of showing why this border crossing is really important and how much it can help the economy on both sides. We can watch a minute of it so you can see.
And this is an initiative that's funded by EIB, so it's supported. It's a collaboration between UNDP and EIB.
Was it? Everything is fine?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Very quick.
Okay, ready?
Yes.
Վեսիմ ճամփորդել նախև առաջ Հայաստանում բարձրանալ սալեր, բացահայտել գողտրի կանկյուններ։ Այդ ժամանակ գնացինք մի քիչ ավելի մեծ մեքենա, ու սկսեցինք այդ մեծ մեքենայով շրջել տարբեր թախած, կորած, սիրուն վայրերով։ Ոմնաշտի Վրաստան եմ գնում, շատ հետաքրքիր հարևաններ ունենք, ես շատ սիրում եմ Թիֆլիսը, սիրում եմ մի քանի պատճառներ, որտեղ շատ լավ հանգստանում ես այնտեղ, եւ դիքը համով բաներ կարելի է այնտեղ ծվել, պանիկ, համեմունքներ, ինչ որ
I'm just going to stop it there and just say that, as you can see, we haven't even started talking about the project and what it's doing yet. What we're trying to do is establish a character and take you kind of through their life, through sights, smells, of the town or the city that they're in, and kind of what's going around them before we start talking about the project and the initiative.
Երեկոները մեծ սեղաններ ենք գցում, սկսում ենք քննարկել նկարներ ցույց տալ, պատմություններ, այդպես մեկ էլ չեմ ասում, ամենքեր ենք ուզում այնտեղ լինել, ասում ես ուզում եք, ուրեմն գնանք քնենք, առավոտը արտանանք.
Should I move to the other video, Karen? So not to show you whole videos, but just kind of to give you a sense of different types of videos that we've done. This is also with EIB, and this was a hospital that they were giving an upgrade.
В смену мы обслуживаем от 600 до 900 пациентов. Затапливает крышу уже давно, поэтому ремонт уже необходим. Это уже, так сказать, прям накипело. Вот. И находится оборудование, которое может затопиться. То есть при непогоде может испортиться. Поэтому люди, которые будут получать помощь в поликлиническом отделении, а тут работает у нас достаточно большое количество специалистов, и детских узких специалистов, и взрослых, лаборатории, здесь УЗИ-кабинет, флюорографический кабинет. Естественно, это создаст лучший материал.
I'll stop it there. Karen, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and as you can see for both of those videos, we try to catch people's attention at the out front. I think a lot of times people tend to put slates at the beginning of videos with long explanations and logos and, you know, to kind of tell you the story in text as you open the video. But like I said, as people are scrolling through social media feeds, or if somebody's going to send them something and a link, they're going to watch the first 10 seconds, and if they're not caught, they're going to turn it off. So we really try to catch people at the beginning with that kind of interest.
Maybe it's good to mention the ending of these videos, where we usually put the work that we're doing at the end once we've got people's attention. So this says, you know, many infrastructure projects are in progress in Eastern Ukraine. And then there's a second line. Well, it's not here, but it's talking about kind of the restoration and the upgrades that we're doing with UNDP and EIB.
So the other kind of video that we do is more kind of like a donor highlight. We do a lot of work with partnerships and with various donors. We want to highlight the work that they've done. So these are some examples of work that we've done with the EU and their support in either the Western Balkans or the Eastern Partnership region. And these are just kind of compilations to get people excited. We use a collection of visuals. There's no one specific story that we're telling, but it's more to give an overall feeling. These are used a lot in conferences or to promote these partnerships in a way where we can show our collaborations.
And the challenge with these kinds of videos, I mean, if it, you know, in this case, the ask was to do a specific video thanking a particular donor. And that can get really kind of dry and boring really fast, and you can lose your audience very quickly. So for us, it was really important, like Karen said, to find really kind of strong, beautiful visuals that can carry the story forward and make the audience stay interested in it. And what we wanted to do also to catch people's attention is to kind of keep it captioned throughout so that it tells its own story, and you don't need to turn the sound on even to hear a narrator speak the whole time. But of course, if you do turn the sound on, there's kind of a dynamic, upbeat music that again helps people stay involved in the video.
So the last video type that I'll mention is the caption videos. As we've been saying, everything we do, we usually put captions on anyway. But both of those videos were things that required a bit of time and resources. The first two, require somebody actually shooting a story, conceiving and shooting a story. The second one's the donor highlights, requires getting lots of different footage and editing together. But when we do caption videos for social media, we actually just take sets of photographs that we've used in the past that people have submitted for stories, and we just make little quick videos at them, putting captions on the screen, so that we're telling just a very small story. It takes no money, it takes very little time, but it's very catchy, and you can post it on Twitter, Instagram, anything like that, and it engages people.
And this is kind of taking that kind of trend that AJ Plus started, Al Jazeera Plus started with kind of like, videos that are kind of telling their own story through text. So we do that a lot because we realize that people are reading videos way more than they're reading articles.
I'm sure you've seen a lot of these from the World Economic Forum. They post like 6 of them a day. So they're very popular, and they're very popular for sharing. So people are always sharing these videos.
And just to show you, I mean, this is Reuters with a UNDP project, and they also they did several versions of the video, one with short captions, because even on social media, that's what people are going to read.
And this is also a really good example of how one product can actually have many different actual pieces. So when Mehmet mentioned this piece, we did a partnership with the Thomson Reuters Foundation, and they produced actual videos that they shared throughout their Reuters network, so people could air them on TV or post them on their websites. And it was, a regular long form video, 6-7 minutes. But then they also took that footage and made these caption videos so that they could promote it on social media, and then people could link to the longer story and to the piece. So it's also very helpful to know that whenever you have a product, there's different things you could do with that. Make shorter versions, maybe take still shots, maybe just put one line from the video on a picture. Use the materials you have to do lots of different versions. So best practices, and this is for us and how we work, we generally try to avoid voice narration, especially if you're coming from, say, you're talking about Kyrgyzstan and there's this weird British man who's explaining how there's so much poverty in Kyrgyzstan, and now we have this project that's helping that. This omnipresent colonialistic voice that comes over everything is really off-putting to audiences, and they really don't feel like they're getting a natural story. It also tends to, people tend to use narration to stand in for what the people on the ground are actually saying. Oftentimes, how many times have you seen a video where there's like a beneficiary in the video, but they don't actually get to talk, and it's just somebody telling you what they think? So you really want to avoid that. And if you need to put information in that you could only do with a narration, we would rather put text on screen, as I was mentioning, where we just describe what's happening. And you can read it really quickly, and then you can move on to the more interesting parts of the video. Similarly, we believe to show, don't tell. I mean, to have a narration telling you everything that you could show in just a few shots of actually seeing something on the ground. I know it's very hard because a lot of times you have to have the resources to go into the field and shoot a project, but showing is always better. You want to show the impact at the end. You want to gain their trust and gain the human momentum. And then at the end, you can say, as Mehmet showed in the Ukraine video, what exactly is happening, how many hospitals are being built. Here on the right, you have a still from the end of a video that we made about a fish farmer. We spent the whole video just telling his story, and then we explained that he and many other farmers have been helped by this project with the EU and UNDP. Where you can, I know that this is probably very hard in the world that you're in, because I know that there is bureaucracy and lots of people want to be profiled and include themselves in videos and on posts and have handshaking pictures on the top of stories. But wherever you can, avoid officials, because officials are not the story. They are the people that are indeed helping to deliver the impact. But at the end, you really want to see the people that are being impacted. So as much as you can avoid having an official tell you how important the project is, I would rather see how important it is from somebody who's being affected. In the same way, when you get quotes from people for either a written story or for a video, they should be organic. We don't want it to sound like we fed them a script. that they said that UNDP is fantastic, and they learned about this UNDP training, and then they went to this UNDP training, and now they know how to do this thing, and they can open their business because UNDP is great. I think sometimes they say that because they think that's what we want to hear. So if that's what's happening, you also want to dig a little deeper and try to get really a natural reason for things. We tend to only mention the organization briefly at the end. We do this both for ourselves and for donors that we're acknowledging. We think that you put it at the end because by then you've built people's trust, you've built their interest, and then you can reveal, you know, this is UNDP, this is the EU, this is the Czech partnership. Isn't that great? Aren't we doing great work? And it feels more authentic that way.
And honestly, sorry, just to interrupt. I mean, because you're sharing the video from your social media channel or from your website anyway, people already know that it is your organization. So that's why it's enough to just put it at the end.
And then also the last one is the same as the earlier one, but just never ask people to thank UNDP or another organization as a donor, because we're not doing them a favor. You know, we alienate our audiences when they hear, thanks to UNDP, I did this. It just loosens the trust a little bit. And you just then feel like it's a commercial. And I think you don't want to feel like it's a commercial. You want to feel like it's a genuine piece of interest that you're learning.
So moving on from videos, photo essays.
So, you know, Mehmet mentioned earlier about how visuals are important, and photos are very, very important. We tend to do a lot of photo essays, and they're really powerful because the pictures are so strong and people connect with the color and the imagery. It takes them to places they can't really go. And then you can build the story around those photos. People get a sense that they're there. They want to know more. They want to understand who these people are, what, you know, is happening in the environment. So it's really compelling, and then you can use these photos also to promote those photo essays on social media or in other ways. And it's just a really great way to tell a story where people can really dive into the feeling. And this is a piece, an EU for Climate project, and it's a story about restoring agricultural practices in the forests so that it can help provide more safety from logging and better agriculture, etc.
But you have to know that the success of this kind of format depends really on the quality of the visuals that you get. So, you know, it's not enough to simply get photos from a cell phone while a colleague is on the ground meeting beneficiaries, and that's not going to necessarily help people kind of be transported to where you want them to be transported. So it's really important for us to invest in professional photographers who really know this work well, and, you know, who are like photojournalists and kind of can show it in its full color.
I would also know one of the things that I think a lot of times, I mean, this happens a lot in our country offices, I imagine it probably also happens in your organizations, that some of the only times that you actually have access to different projects that you're supporting is maybe when an official goes to visit that project. And maybe they have a photographer with them, which is great, but what usually tends to happen is that that photographer then just takes pictures of the official looking at things and touching things and shaking people's hands. And you're in this beautiful environment with all this great information about the project that you're supporting, but you never actually get to see that stuff without the interference of the donor or, you know, or the organization all the time. So even if you are having kind of a field trip with an official, ask the photographer to also take a series of pictures of the context of the environment, of the materials that are, you know, free of our interference. So blogs and think pieces are a really great way to convey complicated things. I know a lot of times we don't have the resources for photography, or we don't have the time or the access, especially right now, for instance, with COVID, it's hard to actually dispatch people out to take photographs because of the health implications. And there are some very complicated things that we do that are not really something that you can put a human face on, or you can put a human interest story around, especially things with governments, behind the scenes, logistics, building new systems. These are all very, very hard to convey visually. So blogs and think pieces are a great way to get this information out there, but unlike a press release or a very heavy article, a blog post gives you an entree through a personal voice. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, this is my story, but it's more a personal tone to the piece. And it's an example of somebody kind of conveying these complicated topics, but through their eyes, through their experience. You can also use blogs as a kind of working out loud process. Maybe you have a project you're working on, you're not going to see results. There can be no story for at least a year, but there are really interesting things happening on the ground and it's exciting. So maybe you want to blog about that and talk about the process, the challenges that you're facing, the things that you've been overcoming, some like small wins that you have. This is a great way, like for instance, the top one on the right is a piece written by our coordinator for the Aid for Trade project in Central Asia. And she was actually talking about 10 years and the lessons that they've learned working in Central Asia for this aid project that was through Finland, supported by the government of Finland. And so she just takes you through all of these different lessons that she's learned. And it's a really great way to look at really underneath the things and you learn lessons. And it also positions you as a thought leader, positions you as an organization who knows what they're doing, has something to offer, and is a partner that you would like to have. And we can also use blog posts as pitching. We can use them as op-eds. We sometimes pitch them to newspapers or other online platforms. And then we also do some partnerships with other organizations, like when we had our Istanbul Development Dialogues 2 years ago. We did a whole series of blog posts leading up to it because it was related to financing development. And those blog posts were not necessarily written by UNDP people, but they were written by outside experts that were our partners. So you're also creating a symbiotic relationship in communications between us and them and partners. So you engage your audience, you widen your audience, you have new people see your thought leadership. So this is a great way to tackle a difficult topic.
Thanks, Karen. And just to add to that, I mean, with the Central Asia Aid for Trade blog, for example, the 10 years of lessons, that's not a coincidence. That was a very strategic decision that we made to position the blog in that way, because we were aware that if this person only talks about 10 years of their project, it's going to sound like they're just praising themselves and they're just recounting their successes and highlights from the last 10 years. And that's not necessarily something that people are going to want to read. So we're always asking ourselves the question, what makes this blog interesting to read for others? And we think that when you share lessons learned, both successes and failures, you're automatically kind of getting new audiences, because then they can say, okay, well, if I read this, then I will learn something for myself and for my project as well. So it's, when you're writing blogs, always ask yourself, am I writing this just to talk about myself, my project, and praise the work that I'm doing? Or can I do something more with it? Can I actually export some wisdom? And that's gonna kind of make your blog more successful. And in terms of tips, like always try to keep it less than 1,000 words. Anything more than that is not going to get people engaged for very long. As you know, people have very short attention span, especially with kind of the topics that we tackle. It's hard to get people kind of stay on the screen for more than a few minutes. So 1,000 words is pretty good, and try to keep a personal tone throughout. Using I and we language is really important. It's something that for some reason people in our sector tend to shy away from. You know, they always write these sentences in third person, like UNDP is doing this, or Polish ministry is doing this, but instead saying we at UNDP are doing this, even that is helping soften your language and making it more palatable for audiences. So another format that we use a lot is microfiction. When I say microfiction, people tend to get confused and they think that they don't know what it is. But actually, if you've ever heard of Humans of New York, and if you've ever followed that Facebook page, you know exactly what it is. So it's something that page popularized. And it's essentially a short story or someone's quote or story that is often shorter than 200 words. And it gets its strength from its authenticity and from its emotion. So Humans of New York was this guy basically that was just going out into the street and photographing people on the street, and he was talking to them, and he was sharing their quotes directly verbatim from their mouths. And that's how he became a huge global sensation. And he's gone on to do many different kind of offshoot series, one of them being like refugee stories. And he just goes around, talks to refugees, takes their picture and puts a quote from them. And it's been a huge success. So we try to use that as an inspiration for our work, and we've used it several times. For example, on Human Rights Day in 2018, we spoke to people who are defending the rights of themselves and others who are standing up for human rights. And we collected stories and photos of people from the region and put them together in one piece. And once we have that long piece, we can also do individual Facebook posts on each person. So again, like Karen said, you can take something and package it in many different ways. Another time we used it was for International Women's Day. And again, we spoke to people around the region who are pushing for women's rights, 12 change makers. And we had a few quotes from each of them. The disadvantage of this, not so much a disadvantage, but the only time this format really works well is if you actually have authentic, beautiful, emotional stories. Otherwise, if you're just doing it just because it's cheap and easy, and the quote is very uninspiring, then you're not going to get the intended outcome, intended effect. So it does have to be emotional and strong. But the other advantage of it is that it's really, this is the format for 2020. I mean, we're scrolling on our social media feeds all the time, and we're looking for content that is what we call thumb stopping, something that will stop our thumb and say, okay, here is something that I'm actually interested in reading. And microfiction can do that because people don't have to click on anything else. As they're scrolling, they're going to see the quote, they're going to see the photo, they're going to look at it, and then they're going to move on. So we're meeting people where they are, and that's why microfiction can be really successful for us. Final thing that we wanted to mention, before we close this loop is, of course, social media. I mean, we really do need to invest in social media, and I think maybe talking about best practices for social media is a whole other presentation. But just to say that your organization needs to have a strong voice on social media, a personal, warm tone. You should be writing in clear language. You should be writing from the other side's perspective, like thinking, okay, if I was someone else, what would make me read this tweet? So strong visuals are important as always, clear short sentences, and really trying to distill the complex work that we do in language that people can understand. Even when you are acknowledging a donor, for example, in the second tweet, we say, there's a direct correlation between infrastructure and well-being. This bridge was damaged during the 2014 conflict in Ukraine. And in 2017, it was renovated with the support of Japan. The renovation increased manufacturing in the area, creating new jobs and boosting local economy. It's incredible what you can do in a matter of 4 sentences, right? The first sentence here is giving you context of what this tweet is talking about. The second tweet is talking about the history. The third sentence is what we're doing right now to address the problem. And the fourth is talking about the outcome and the result of the initiative. So really, there is enough space here to talk about everything that we want if we do it right. And just more examples of our social media. We try to have humans again up front in our photos, smiling faces, people who are agents of change, people who are in charge of their lives. We don't want to elicit pity from anyone. We're just trying to elicit empathy. We're not looking down on anyone. We see and recognize our beneficiaries as strong, empowered beings who, once given the right tools, can turn their lives around. And that's how we approach our messaging also on social media. We try to use a balance of hashtags and handles, but we don't want to go overboard with hashtags. We don't want to look like we're spamming our audiences. So those are just a few takeaway points that I can think of for social media. Karen, is there anything else you want to add?
I would just add that I think that it all comes back to the authenticity again. And while we do use social media a lot to promote our work, we also use social media to build relationships with other organizations, to share stories, to engage with people. If you're just reading someone's feed and all you're seeing is just promo piece, talking about yourself in ways that are really boring and very bureaucratic, then you're not actually going to want to follow that channel anymore. And you're not going to want to share any of those things. But if what you're seeing is stories and faces, like Mehmet said, and engagement and praising somebody else, you're more likely to share that content and then have a wider spread. Because at the end of the day, you want people to see your content, and your content has to be interesting for people to see it.
That's a good point. And also, I just want to add to that one metaphor, one analogy I always use in trainings is, think of if you're running a social media channel for your organization, think of yourself as like a TV channel producer. And the content that you want to put on your social media, they're all essentially commercials. But if you were running a TV channel, you wouldn't want to run commercials all day long, right? You actually need people to watch your programming so they can stay around when you actually have commercials going on. So that's why you need to think beyond just promoting yourself and your work day in and day out. You might want to also share related articles, news, from partner organizations, from the country that you're working in, and just kind of create a sense of community that people can tap into when they're following your channel. And when you do that, they will stick around for your quote unquote commercials as well. Karen, you're on mute.
I think we have to wrap soon.
Okay, yeah, we just have a couple slides left. So we'll just go through this very quickly. We talked about the narration thing already. Mehmet mentioned photos. You know, your cell phone, as great as, you know, your new iPhone 10 might be, chances are the photos are not going to be high quality enough to use. So hire professionals wherever you can. Blog posts about events or conferences, not so interesting to people unless you're actually blogging about the topic of the conference and why it's important. Same videos, photos of those events, conferences, not so interesting to people. If they're not in the room, watching it from afar is not very compelling. And as Mehmet said, content that is just self-praising. You really don't want to do that because why would someone want to just listen to themselves talk about themselves all the time? So that's what to avoid.
So with, you know, following what to avoid here, what things to do, best practices from what we're seeing from our work, and hopefully these can be takeaways from this presentation. As we mentioned, authenticity, genuineness, these are really important. So stories or quotes from beneficiaries in their own words, we can actually hear them, we can actually read them, treat them with agency. That's what really matters. Creative content, always thinking about creativity in terms of visual, in terms of interactivity. It's going to take your work to unusual audiences, people beyond the sector, because people are going to share it as a good example of communications. Again, regarding the self-praise issue, don't make yourself the story. You're not the story. You're the implementing agency. So treat yourself as a footnote and really give voice to the people whose lives are changing as a result of your work, and that will make yourself the story if you tell the story in that way. Keep it real, don't overdo it, don't oversell your results. Nobody's expecting you to change the whole world, to solve all of the world's problems. So if your project is benefiting 100 people, it's benefiting 100 people. If it's benefiting 2,000 people, it's only benefiting 2,000 people. You don't have to paint a rosy picture. You don't have to make it look like you solved all of these communities' problems. You can still leave space for the fact that there are still other problems in that community, but you solved this one little thing. I think people have intelligence to understand that, you know, you may not be doing everything that you're saying you're doing. So just be honest, be real about what you're promising. And finally, invest in capacity, either internal staff or an external company that actually has multimedia skills. Everything that we just mentioned does require expertise. That's why communications is its own job. And it does require you to have your own communication staff that has video editing skills, that knows a good photo from a bad photo, that can work with illustration. Even if they can't do illustration, maybe work with someone who can. So either you're going to have someone like an external company on a roster who can do this, or you really need to, if you have the funds, invest in one or two key staff internally that can do this for you. And again,
No, I would also say that, like, unfortunately, in a lot of development agencies, and maybe also similar in your agencies, communication person is really what they think of as a PR specialist, and that person is really kind of tasked with writing press releases, hosting events, making you know, pens and folders that have your logo on them. This is not communications. I mean, some of it is, but we really have to step out of that. If you truly want to communicate to the outside world and not just to your bubble, you need to have communication capacity that can go outside of that. And you need to have sort of buy-in from above that understands that what you need for communications is to get out of that bubble.
That's it. I mean, again, just one takeaway: don't just communicate, tell stories, avoid being a commercial, don't praise yourself, don't make yourself the center of the story, give voice to your beneficiaries, and do it in ethical, respectful, and visually engaging ways, and you'll be golden. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karen and Mehmet. I think that was amazing, and a lot of things to digest. I wonder if there are any direct questions. I mean, following, you know, to clarify, or because we don't have much time left for discussion. Like, I guess I have to apologize again. Yeah, anyone has questions? It's great to see people again. If you could, you know, turn on your videos if it's possible. Yeah, please go ahead.
I have a question. Thanks for your lovely presentation, Mehmet and Karen. It was very useful. I'm interested in how you measure the success of your campaigns or your visuals, videos, everything that you do. What are your main KPIs to keep in mind, just how to measure whether what we did was good or no? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. We do collect analytics monthly. And every month we try to make a point within our communications team to have 1 or 2 hours to sit through, go through the analytics and see from month to month what worked and what didn't work, what went up, what went down. With KPIs, I think, people used to think that just looking at impressions, like number of views, was enough, but it's really not. It's not meaningful to just look at how many people's social media feeds did this land on. We really want to see how many people are actually engaging with the content. So we're also, mostly interested in number of engagement, like clicks, watches to the end, or how much they watched a particular video, how long they watched it for, responses, replies, comments, shares. Those are the things that we're interested in.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? I was also thinking while I was listening to your presentation, I mean, obviously this is a webinar for ODA providers, or so-called, let's say, donors. But one thing we all know very well is donors are not, let's say, one unified, one whole, right? We always have to make the case to the Minister of Finance, as a development practitioner, or to the Minister of Planning. And one thing that we were always discussing in the previous webinars is, now with COVID, how are we going to make the case to increase ODA, or even to maintain the ODA as it is, right? And that is, I think, a challenge for all our development agencies. And I think that's why when you mentioned donor, I think it's always very relevant. How do you communicate your work as a development practitioner? I don't see any hands. Are there any other questions? You can just unmute yourself and ask also, if that's fine. Anyone?
I was just writing in the comments that if anybody wants to fight us on anything, we're also welcoming opposing views. I mean, I know that not everything we said is going to be applicable in every organization. We totally understand that. So if anyone wants to protest anything we said, we don't have enough funds for this. We don't have enough. We're happy to hear that. There's a question
in the chat box. Yeah.
About the project budget. So there has been a change recently on the UNDP side where all of the projects are supposed to have a certain percentage built into their budget on communications. I haven't actually seen this in practice yet. In terms of the money we spend on communications, a lot of our funding actually comes from the country offices, because we're the regional office and we're there to support the country offices. So a lot of our work is in collaboration with them. They dispatch a photographer and then together we make a product. We do have some money on our own, a very small budget, which we do some special projects with, and we also collaborate with the teams in the IRH on projects together on certain topics. But I mean, the point is that usually the communication budget is very small, and you have to be very creative about how you use that money, and that is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Funding is definitely a challenge for us, and it's not commonplace to have lots of budget for communications at UNDP. So like Karen said, we try to get creative, and I mean, it kind of determines sometimes what kind of a communications format we will use, right? That's why we use short caption videos with photos if we don't have any money, but if we do, then we will hire a videographer to send out to the field to actually make a really nice video for us. So it is part of a consideration.
I think this is great. And I mean, as you all know, we will share the webinar recording. And of course, if you have any questions, discussions, please join the Spark Blue platform, and please feel free to continue sharing resources and discussing. And we also had a very brief initial discussion with Felix from the DevCom that we may also want to do some follow-ups, because one thing that we were discussing is this topic, communicating development, is always relevant. And that's why I think, you know, we used to say like, oh, we already had a workshop on that topic, but actually this is not a, you know, one area where you just cover in with one workshop and that's it. No, not to mention the, you know, staff rotation, etc. So I think we'll follow up one way or the other, and we would love to hear your feedback. As always, we will share a survey with you. I mean, and I think looking at the time, I think I would like to thank Karen and Mehmet for a wonderful presentation, which I'm sure everybody found very useful, and we'll share with those who registered and who didn't participate. For next week, yes, please, Karen.
One very quick point. I know that a lot of you are working for organizations that are also our partners and our donors and our funders. And one thing that I would just note in everything that we've just said is one of the reasons why we want people to kind of buy into these ideas is because we actually really want to promote your partnership, and we really want to promote our collaboration with you and the support that you're giving us. But it's very hard for us to do that without a lot of these tools in place, because if we don't have the content to promote, it's very hard to promote. So this is just also a plea that for those of you who are working for partners that are our partners, that we would, you know, please will help support in any way that we can to help get that information so we can help promote you.
Thanks for that, Karen. It's great point. If there are no other urgent comments no. So I apologize again for a little bit, going over the time. And I mean, I did get some feedback that we should make it longer. But again, when we had the poll, then overwhelming majority was for 1 hour. So, you know, I don't know if, I mean, let's stick with the majority rule for now, and we stick with the 1 hour, or we try to. And next week we'll be launching, or the new month, October, will be dedicated to greening development cooperation. So it's going to be our green month for our ODA series. So we will have 3 webinars dedicated to green finance, which we're organizing together with the Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic. And we will have 2 more webinars after that on mainstreaming environment and climate in development cooperation. So we hope to see you all next week, same time, Thursday, 11 a.m. Istanbul time. And we'd be also sharing the flyers for the coming webinars, and we'd be very grateful if you could share it with your interested colleagues, as well as those from the Ministry of Finance. They may find it also interesting. So thank you once more, and yeah, let's continue the discussion on Spark Blue, and see you latest next Thursday. Thank you. Please open your mic and yeah, say hello to your neighbor. As
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.